everyone for joining us tonight for Journey Down the Secret River. I'm Katie Kelly. I'm the Special Programs Coordinator here at the Orange County Regional History Center. I also want to thank all of our guests who are watching tonight via live stream. Tonight's program is offered as a partnership between the Orange County Regional History Center and Opera Orlando. We love when we have the opportunity to partner with other cultural organizations and celebrate the intersections between art and history, between history and all of the arts. So we're very happy to be holding this event tonight, and we're very happy to have all of you here with us. I want to extend a special thanks to our members who are either attending in person or watching via the live stream. Your membership and contributions are vitally important to fulfilling the History Center's mission to serve as the gateway for community engagement, education, and inspiration through sharing Central Florida's continually unfolding story. It's a role we think is more important now than ever. You can find information about memberships, donations, and a variety of other ways to support the History Center out here in our lobby or by visiting thehistorycenter.org. So to go ahead and get things started, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Gabriel Pricer of Opera Orlando. He'll introduce the program tonight, and he will also introduce all of our guests that are with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie, so much. Thank you, Pam. Thank you to the Orange County Regional History Center for having us. You know, when we decided we're going to go crazy and commission an opera at Opera Orlando, that's a risky thing, right? Modern opera, people can be scared of that. You know, it's like, just do Bohème every year. You'll be fine, right? But it's one of those things where you have an idea, and then things start to come together like, gosh, this really was a good idea. So first of all, to commission an opera, you have to put a composer and a librettist together. We found a great local composer, a dear friend of our company, Stella Sung, who's here with us. Say hi to Stella. And we'll be hearing from her a little bit later. So we put her together with another friend of our company, Mark Campbell, Pulitzer Prize-winning librettist. And we said, hey, guys, we want you to write an opera. They're like, we don't even know each other. But they set to it, and Stella luckily found this beautiful story, The Secret River, written by a Florida author, Marjorie Kanan Rawlings, written about Florida. And it was like, this is a perfect fit. But then the more we dug in and explored, then we found out there's a whole archive at University of Florida. And there's this wonderful person there called Florence Turcotte, or short for Flo, right? She likes to go by Flo, just think flowing down the Secret River. And she was so gung-ho about the project. She said, we want to become involved. Both the University of Florida has been a great partner to us, also the Marjorie Kanan Rawlings Society. They are actually underwriting our performer, Emily, who you're going to hear from as well, in the performance. So that was an amazing partnership. And then we reached out to the Orange County Regional History Center and said, you know, we're doing this opera called The Secret River. Any chance you guys might want to do something with it? They're like, yes! Katie's like, yes, let's do it. And so we just found all these wonderful, wonderful partnerships that reinforced to us this was meant to be. Right? I just found out today it's the 75th anniversary. Tell me, Flo. Of the movie The Yearling. So there was a big event last week around. There will be.
Next weekend.
So who knew, right? I guess we'll have to show up and sing at that as well. We're just so tickled, so excited, and so happy that you can be a part of it. We really feel like this opera is a part of our community, and so we want you to be involved. I'm going to turn it over to our special guest, our lecturer. She knows more about Marjorie Kanan Rawlings than anybody else, and she is going to walk us through the history and the context of the Secret River. Please help me welcome Florence Turcotte.
Thank you so much, Gabe. Thank you to all of you for attending, and I'm so excited to be here. I'm delighted to be part of tonight's journey down the Secret River and to speak to you about the life and times of Marjorie Kanan Rawlings and the genesis of these two editions of the Secret River book, and now the genesis of the beautiful opera, The Secret River. So I'd like to, my whole purpose tonight is to give you some background, some historical background about Rawlings, and of course to get you excited about attending the Secret River Opera and being present at the premiere of a brand new opera like this. This is fantastic. So again, my name is Florence Turcotte, and this is where I work. I serve as a literary manuscripts archivist in the Department of Special and Area Studies Collections at George A. Smathers Libraries, the University of Florida. The primary focus of our literary collections are authors who lived in and wrote about Florida. Two of our flagship literary collections are the Marjorie Kanan Rawlings and the Zora Neale Hurston papers. The two women were friends, and we have correspondence between them in the collections. I could do another presentation about Zora Neale Hurston, but today we're focusing on Rawlings. Marjorie Kanan was born on August 8, 1896 in Washington, D.C. A pensive and precocious child, she learned to read and write at an early age. When she was 12, she won a $2 prize for a story published in the Washington Post. Her mother was Ida Traphagen Kanan. Her father was Arthur Frank Kanan, an examiner in the U.S. Patent Office. Frustrated by his bureaucratic career, he bought a dairy farm in Maryland and introduced Marjorie to his own appreciation for nature at a young age. He died in 1913 when Marjorie was only 16. The next year, after Marjorie graduated from high school, she, her mother, and her younger brother moved to Wisconsin so that she could attend college in Madison. Marjorie did very well at Wisconsin and entered Phi Beta Kappa her junior year. She was active in the theater troupe and enjoyed writing in the University Literary Review. She fell in love with one of her fellow writers at Wisconsin, a young man by the name of Charles Rawlings. After graduation, Marjorie moved to New York City, and Charles went to fight in the war. They were married when he returned from Europe, and they moved to Rochester, New York, to be near his family. After her stint in New York City, Marjorie hated the provincialism of Rochester. In 1928, they took a vacation trip on a steamer to Jacksonville and then up the St. Johns River to Island Grove, Florida, where they visited with Charles's two brothers who were trying to make a living prospecting orange groves. Marjorie instantly fell in love with the place, and using her inheritance, she and Charles left Rochester behind and bought a dilapidated farmhouse and a neglected grove in Cross Creek and moved in early November 1928. Their intention was to sit and write while the oranges grew and made their living for them. The first few years were extremely difficult. There was a freeze. The couples had little time for writing, what with the scarcity of everyday necessities right at the dawn of the Great Depression. But Marjorie, nevertheless, began to record her impressions of the surrounding countryside and the fascinating people in it. In March 1930, she sold her first story, Cracker Chidlings, to Scribner's Magazine, and in December, her second, Jacob's Ladder. Through her association with Scribner's, she became the protege of Maxwell Perkins, beginning an editorial relationship and friendship with him that would be integral to her literary development and creative maturation. She once wrote to him, "You have the knack of taking the imagination of another in the palm of your hand." She would write letters to him detailing her encounters with the flora, fauna, and colorful people of north central Florida. He urged her to write fiction about these people set in the scrubland surrounding her home. And we have here Marjorie Kanan Rawlings with us. Well, at least our fabulous performer who will play the role of Marjorie Kanan Rawlings in the opera. Please welcome Emily Pooley to sing the opening scene from The Secret River, Marjorie's aria, Write What You Know.
write what you know. Advised good old Mark Twain. Write what you know. Says the old refrain. The world around you is as far as you need to go. Write what you know. Write what you know. An ice floe on the buried street. A polar bear with a chopper's getting glum. And then some penguins come. Oh, that's just dumb. Write what you know. And you should be set. Write what you know. Hasn't failed you yet. Just look around you, and the words will begin to flow. Write what you know. Write what you know. Young and smart, a humble home in the marshes, not far from Cross Creek. Yes, that's good. Wakes one morning. She has a toy dog made of sticks. Oh, and a river, a hidden river. No, a secluded river. No. A secret river. Yes. A secret river.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Emily, or should I say Marjorie? Fantastic. So in 1931, Marjorie went to live with a family in what we call the Big Scrub, which is now the Ocala National Forest. At the urging of Max Perkins, she began to write her first novel, South Moon Under, which was published in 1933, the same year that she obtained a divorce from Charles Rawlings. The two had quarreled incessantly, and Charles did not share in the inspiration that Marjorie got from Creek living. Although Marjorie was faced with a tremendous challenge, being a woman living alone in the rural South during the Great Depression, her novel was very successful, and she began to enjoy her independence. She loved entertaining and often staged fairly elaborate dinner parties in her Creek home. She had persistent problems with hiring and retaining servants and Grove help. Here are two of her more successful hires. Martha Mickens on the left and Idella Parker on the right. Idella later wrote a book called The Perfect Maid about her experiences with Marjorie. Evidence suggests that Mrs. Rawlings was an exacting and sometimes difficult employer, but she managed to establish intimate and long-term connections with many of the African American families at the Creek. Here is a photo of a group of Rawlings friends being entertained by the hired help at a soiree. Present at many of these parties was Marjorie's friend Norton Baskin, a hotel man from Ocala. Norton and Marjorie, though very different, hit it off from the start. He was establishing a hotel and restaurant business in St. Augustine, and Marjorie would often visit him there. They would enjoy an active social life, and then she would force herself to return to the Creek to get back to her writing. At Max's urging, she was beginning at this time to coalesce her ideas for a boys' book about the big scrub. Under his gentle tutelage, Marjorie produced what was to be her most successful book, The Yearling, in 1938, and was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Literature. This is a photo of the first page of the Yearling manuscript that we have in the Rawlings archive. The Yearling was printed in many different languages. And as you may know, The Yearling also became a major motion picture in 1946, starring Gregory Peck and Jane Wyman as the two Baxter parents, and child actor Claude Jarman Jr. As the boy Jody. This is a photo of Marjorie on the movie set at Salt Springs. With her success on the literary front, Marjorie had more time to enjoy her fishing and hunting activities and had many encounters with local people living off the land, indeed, depending on the land for their very survival, as does Calpurnia's family in the story. This is again at Salt Springs with doing some crab gigging. Marjorie married Norton Baskin in the fall of 1941, and soon thereafter he went off to volunteer in the war effort in Burma. She put a lot of energy into writing letters to him while he was away, as many as 3 a day. They were married in St. Augustine. At the same time, Marjorie was putting the finishing touches on Cross Creek, a collection of short vignettes paying homage to her adopted home. The book, too, enjoyed almost immediate success, and Rawlings had reached the pinnacle of her literary career. Later, Cross Creek became the focus of another movie starring Mary Steenburgen, released in 1983. But back in 1943, one of her subjects in Cross Creek, the census taker, Zelma Kaysen, took issue with Marjorie's portrayal of her in the book, which read as follows. Zelma is an ageless spinster resembling an angry and efficient canary. She manages her orange grove and as much of the village and county as needs management or will submit to it. She combines the more violent characteristics of both, and those who ask for or accept her manifold ministrations think nothing of being cursed loudly at the very instant of being tenderly fed, nursed, or guided through their troubles. Kaysen entered a $100,000 lawsuit against Rawlings for libel. The charge was then changed to the invasion of privacy. Litigation dragged on until, in May of 1946, Rawlings won and the suit was dismissed in the courthouse in Gainesville. Kaysen appealed, however, and in 1947, the state Supreme Court overthrew the decision, stating that the book had caused Zelma injury by parading her private life before the entire world. The court awarded Zelma damages in the amount of $1 plus court costs, which amounted to about $10,000. Marjorie was devastated. She spent the summer in Van Hornsville, New York, with some friends in order to escape the publicity and gather material for her novel, The Sojourner, which she had been trying unsuccessfully to write since 1943. It was during this time that Marjorie was trying to write and publish The Secret River, but more on this later. Soon after the trial, Max Perkins, her editor and mentor, died suddenly, and Marjorie plunged into a deep depression. She bought an old farmhouse in Van Hornsville and began to spend most of the year there and only the winters in Cross Creek. The magic was gone from this enchanted place, and Marjorie's health was suffering greatly from a life of hard drinking and smoking and the stress of the trial. She vowed to never again write about Florida. In 1952, she suffered a heart attack, recovered, and finally finished The Sojourner in August. She began research on a biography of Ellen Glasgow in 1953, but died on December 4th of a cerebral hemorrhage. She was buried in Antioch Cemetery near Island Grove, Florida, not far from Cross Creek. Visitors are welcome 365 days a year at her home in Cross Creek, now known as the Marjorie Kanan Rawlings Historic State Park. The interpretive program there will transport you to a time when Rawlings lived and wrote there in 1930s and 1940s. This is a photo of Marjorie on the porch of her home in Cross Creek, composing at her typewriter. I omitted mention of The Secret River in my chronology of Marjorie's life because the book was not published during her lifetime. It was published in 1955, 2 years after her death. Then, in 2009, another version, illustrated by Leo and Diane Dillon, was published. I have copies of both of those, which you're free to look at after the presentation if you'd like. I will briefly compare the two editions, but before I do that, let's go back to the mid-1940s. My research in the Rawlings papers revealed a fascinating story of how the original Secret River came to be. Just a heads up that in my quotation of these primary sources, there are certain terms used that are outdated and considered by some to be derogatory and racist when used in the present context. According to Rawlings in 1947, she and her artist friend, Bob Camp, had been discussing the idea for this book for a few years, possibly since after Cross Creek came out in 1942. Camp had done some sketches and paintings of an African-American girl protagonist. In 1947, Rawlings was struggling with The Sojourner and needed a more productive, perhaps less complicated, creative outlet. She wrote to Max Perkins in February, "For myself, I have never felt more inadequate. The time between books has been so unreasonably long that I feel a true writer would not, could not have let it happen. I don't mean about publication, etc. I mean about working. At any rate, I'm going to Cross Creek early next week to stay until I have my teeth into something. I am torn between 2 or 3 things. Your suggestion that I let the child's story of the little Negro girl develop as it would reminded me of something I said in Cross Creek, that, quote, someday a poet will write a sad and lovely story of a Negro child. I have found that each of my books has developed out of something I have written in a previous book. Some thought evidently unfinished. I could do such a book now, and I would prefer doing it, I believe, to the terrible chore of the book about the spiritual and inarticulate man who derived remotely from my grandfather, Traphagen. But if I do a book about a Negro child in a creative way, that leaves out entirely the child's book for which Robert Camp has already done all the paintings and drawings, and I hate to let him down. Perkins replied, I believe you could write a sad and lovely story of a Negro child. I don't see either quite why Robert Camp's pictures could not be adjusted to such a book. I mean, a really creative and developed one. But anyhow, I hope you will do such a book. Rawlings got right on it. And less than 3 weeks later, she wrote, here is the first draft of a child's story to go with Bob Camp's painting and drawings, which were sent off yesterday. It seems that I may have fallen between two stools. As you will see, there's a certain symbolism, a certain irony at the end, where our little colored girl assumes that the world will be a kind and beautiful place, and our knowing that she will not find it so. It may be too mature in its implications. Having told the story in pretty much fairy tale style, there was no temptation to do a longer or creative thing. The Secret River could make a good title for it, although I would probably want to use a real river instead of an imaginary one. Max writes back, I think it's a little story of great charm and delicacy. This is what I think about the Secret River. It should be a real river, though a little and deeply concealed one, which this child, Calpurnia, had never seen but had heard of. In fact, I think the whole story should have the quality of enchantment, the magic quality that this draft of it does have, but yet it should be more realistic if one could apply such a stern term to such a delicate thing. In a sense, the Calpurnia character evolves during the course of the narrative from a helpless victim of poverty to the village heroine. Her faith in the words of the matriarch, Albertha, and her cleverness in overcoming the obstacles in the forms of wild animals placed before her brings prosperity to her family and restores the economic productivity of the entire forest community. And we just so happen to have Calpurnia here with us tonight. Well, the talented soprano, Kiani Richardson, who portrays Calpurnia, that is, she's going to grace us with her aria, Paper Roses in My Hair, as she thinks about the best way to get the fish to bite. Gorgeous, Kiani. Thank you so much. So Max and Marjorie are going on to discuss the Secret River back and forth in their letters. At this point, Rawlings begins to have misgivings, not about the story, but about her illustrator, Bob Camp, who was also her friend. She confides to Max, "The first painting that Bob Camp made of Calpurnia was so exaggerated as to be almost a caricature. Although it was a really enchanting and whimsical portrait, he does not share my feelings on the race question. And he did agree with me that artistically it would be better to have a straight and more soulful portrait of the child." Now, this is an image of Martha Mickens that Bob Camp did about the same time. And you can see what Rawlings is talking about with his artwork and the caricature nature of his depictions. A stroke of bad luck intervened with Rawlings' plans to begin revising. She wrote to Max, "I was just ready to go back to work on Calpurnia again when I wrecked my car seriously, myself and my maid rather lightly, considering the fact that we turned over twice. The delay will probably be good to the rewriting of the story, as I do need the perspective you suggested." Then another setback. The Florida Supreme Court ruling in favor of Zelma Kaysen came down. Marjorie began to vacillate with her decision to either move forward or turn back to working on The Sojourner. She wrote, "I feel I'm ready to get to work on my book," meaning The Sojourner. "My automobile accident and then this law business stopped short my reworking of the child's story. I have lost interest in it. However, I shall try to do a new version before I go with the novel, as it would be nice to have the child's book ready for the Christmas trade." Again, fate intervened. Max Perkins died suddenly 10 days later. In July, Marjorie wrote to Charles Scribner, "It would be a good idea to let the secret river flow underground for a while. Something better may come of it." She goes on to explain, "I had the feeling that some of Bob's things were caricatures. In fact, his original portrait of the little colored girl was so offensive to me that I asked him to do the other one that you saw and liked. Bob is not liberal and thinks colored people are only funny. But he is enough of an artist to do what we eventually will need. I expect to get back to work on The Sojourner next week." We can only assume that the matter was tabled indefinitely, as Marjorie became entirely engrossed with producing The Sojourner thereafter. Apparently, the secret river flowed underground until sometime after Marjorie's death. In May of 1954, Norton Baskin wrote to Julia Scribner Bigham, Marjorie's literary executor, because she had died, that he had come across the manuscript for Calpurnia on a closet shelf, loose. He found the story lovely, as well as the illustrations done by Bob Camp. Julia, the literary executor, consulted with Phil May, Marjorie's attorney, who did not agree with Norton about the illustrations. Phil wrote to Julia, "I can well understand how the original drawings would be inappropriate for a current publication." Meanwhile, Alice Dalgleish, Scribner's editor of books for younger readers, wrote to Julia that she had an extensive conversation with Charles Scribner Jr. about the book, and that Scribner had decided that Leonard Weisgard should be the illustrator. In July, Julia sent copies of the correspondence between Max and Marjorie about the secret river that I had read earlier to Phil, the lawyer, and said, "If you do some in-between the lines reading, I think you can get a pretty good picture of how things stood when both Marjorie and Scribner's let the project drop." You see, it was not a question that the pictures are no longer suitable. They were really unpublishable then and now because of the racial sensitivity of the juvenile book world. I think, and it seems quite understandable, that Marjorie was unable and perhaps unwilling to withdraw from the collaboration, and knowing that Bob was Norton's close friend, she was struggling with how to deal with the situation. Attorney Phil May got Bob Camp to sign a release from his original understanding with Rawlings in exchange for a payment of $200 in September of 1954. With Camp out of the picture, Alice Dalgleish proceeded with the changes and signed Leonard Weisgard. Dalgleish writes to Julia, he likes the idea of having Calpurnia a Negro child, although he'll probably make her an attractive little light-colored girl. I don't know. She goes on, we all feel that the beauty parlor must be modified. It can just be a little shop. And we feel that Madame Albertha should be Mother Albertha. Without the beauty shop, the Madam loses its point. And isn't it just too suggestive of Amos and Andy? I do hope you agree to this change because it seems to me vital to the acceptance of the book by Negroes. It's important to remember that the Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court decision had just been handed down in May 1954, 4 months before this conversation happened in the letters. My theory is that Scribners wanted to place their new children's book in black and white schoolrooms, and at the same time having a book in both markets was quite unusual at the time, but it would position the book quite well when schools became integrated in all due time, right? And in his book, In the Company of Writers, A Life in Publishing, Charles Scribner Jr. noted somewhat disingenuously that Rawlings never mentioned Calpurnia's race. Well, she didn't in the text, in the manuscript of the book, but she sure did in her letters that he had seen. And he said, we were a little troubled by this ambiguity. Whatever our decision, we could land on the wrong side of the school boards. Then I had an inspiration. I had the entire book printed on black ink on brown paper so that there was no imputed colors in the illustrations. That was one of my silent contributions to dissolving the color barrier in the 1950s. For her part, this is what Alice Dalgleish said about the book's fabrication. The book was printed in an unusual way, brown being a printed color all over the sheet, with the artist preparing color separations for the black and the white, which is white paper showing through the printed brown color. We've never done a book quite like this before, and most people seem to think it is printed on brown paper, which it is not. In the end, though, everyone seemed pleased with the end result. On the back flap of the book jacket for The Secret River, Julia wrote, "This is the only story that Marjorie Rawlings wrote directly for children. Her letters show that she wanted the story to stand as a conception of the universal child and of the imagination of childhood." This message makes it clear that Julia believed that Rawlings meant this book to resonate with children regardless of race, without condescension or judgment. So, thinking about the historical context of The Secret River, when it came out in 1955, the parents of the children reading it would have been growing up during the Great Depression. Many of them would have been able to relate to the deprivation described in the beginning of the book. The book would have conveyed an important, empowering message to children about their ability to bring about change in their own community. This is certainly a message that would resonate with parents of all races, ethnicities, and economic classes at the time, as it does now. Athenaeum Books for Young Readers issued a revised edition of The Secret River in 2009 with luminous, full-color acrylic illustrations by Leo and Diane Dillon, the winner of 2 Caldecott Awards. Unlike the race-neutral, realistic line drawings by Weisgard, the Dillons emphasized the magical nature of the story and left no doubt as to the race of the protagonist Calpurnia. The Dillons' version of The Secret River received one of 2 honorable mentions in the fiction category of the 2012 Bologna Ragazzi Awards, an international children's book award that honors the art and design of illustrated books worldwide. In the words of the Bologna jury, it is only fitting that Marjorie Rawlings, the great American writer loved by so many generations of readers, is finally paid such a refined and sensitive tribute. And that is exactly how I feel about the opera Orlando's production of The Secret River. It's a beautiful tribute to Marjorie Rawlings' work. So as we contemplate this image of Calpurnia with her beloved puppy, and since we've already heard some of her gorgeous music created for The Secret River, I wanted to invite our composer, Stella Sung, to come up and tell us about her inspiration in adapting the book to an opera. Stella is an internationally renowned composer, and like Marjorie, is a local Floridian. Please help me welcome Stella Sung.
Thank you. What a wonderful introduction and beautiful lecture that you've just given us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and for this wonderful story that you put together. Can you tell us something about the story that captured your imagination, that gave you the idea that it could be an opera?
Yeah. Well, Opera Orlando and I started, Gabe Preiser and I started talking about a new opera for the company probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And the company was still a little young at the time, and they were not quite ready for a project. And then we sort of came upon it, and Gabe said, well, we're ready. We're ready to do an opera. And so we thought, okay, now let's see. We want to do something Florida-based. Our librettist, Mark Campbell, wanted to do something that had a Florida theme of some sort. So we went through, we thought, well, Ponce de Leon, Disney, Zora Neale Hurston, all kinds of things. And just wasn't really quite hitting it. And then a friend of mine actually said, oh, well, I just got a book by Marjorie Kanan Rawlings called The Secret River for my daughter. And so she said, you should look at that. And so we did. I got a copy of the book. Gabe got a copy of the book. Mark got a copy of the book. And we fell in love with it immediately. It's a wonderful story. It's a universal story. It's charming. And it's Florida-centric. And so we thought, this is it. This is the story that we want to set. And so we started working at it.
How did you pitch it?
Well,
this was the edition
yes,
that you
this
got,
is the
right?
edition that we got, and it's sort of like, well, this is the story of a young woman, a girl, and she wants to be a writer, and she's full of imagination, and she wants to help her family, and it's all about imagination and community and love of family, and we just absolutely loved it and fell in love with it all. And so Mark started writing his libretto, and he wanted to bring the Kanan Rawlings character into it, and that's where we start with the opera, as Emily gave us this beautiful rendition of. So we start the opera with Kanan Rawlings writing, trying to find the story in her mind. And then we bring in Calpurnia, and the wonderful red thread that Mark brings in is this love of writing and the imagination and the world of wonder that is in our minds.
So do you think, like, with the connections that the young Calpurnia having a desire to become a writer and to be a poet in the book, do you think that Marjorie was kind of projecting her own youth and childhood as an aspiring writer on that character as well?
Yes, I think as I started working on the piece and looking through Mark's libretto, and also, thankfully, very blessedly, having the archive right at UF, where we actually came to visit you. Gabe and I came to Gainesville, and which is my hometown, actually. So I am a native of Floridian, and I remember going to visit Cross Creek. We would get field trips and go to her home. And at that time, it was like, oh, it's a Florida writer. That's great. And we just, as kids, we just liked roaming around on the whole yard and the chickens and everything else around there. So, but Gabe and I went up to visit Flo at the archives, and she graciously allowed us to look at all this material. It's a fantastic treasure trove of historical documents, and then also these original first edition books and so on. And so we took a trip up there, and then as I started thinking more about this and reading it and then creating the music, my personal feeling is that I think Canaan Rawlings was reflecting a little bit about her own childhood, maybe the secret river of her own desiring and youthfulness and being very close to the water here in Florida. I think it had a lot of symbolism, a lot of meaning in there for her. And so I do believe that it was a way for her to release maybe some of the tensions of all the adult life that we all go through and find that perfect gem of childhood innocence.
Very interestingly, Rawlings, when right after she obtained the divorce from Charles in 1933, took a trip down the St. Johns River with her friend Desi Smith, and that was somewhat of a cathartic thing. She felt like she had to leave the hustle and bustle and the stresses of her home and the literary life behind, and she embarked on this river trip with her friend, and she writes about it in a vignette in Cross Creek called Hyacinth Drift. It's a straight up autobiographical story that she tells, and the relief that she felt from that, I think it came out a bit in what the redemption that the character, the girl Calpurnia, finds in her trip down the secret river. So interesting correlations. So why did you want to do it here in Orlando? Why did you want to, why did you approach Opera Orlando to go about this?
Right. Well, I think the opera company was ready to do a new opera, and as Gabe mentioned earlier, new opera is kind of scary sometimes, and people don't really know the music, and they're not quite sure of the words, and they're not quite sure of the stories, and so on. So it just seemed like the right time and place to do it, and we wanted to find something Florida-centric, and Gabe actually is also from Florida, right, Gabe?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Indoor foliage capital of the world.
That's it. So we've got native Floridians here, and I think having grown up in Florida, there is something about the land and the environment that we identify with and feel very close to. So this just fit in beautifully.
Cool. So do you think that this is an opera that has relevance today and that could attract new and diverse opera fans?
Absolutely.
Audiences? Uh-huh.
Absolutely. One of the things that my personal hope is that this opera will help engage younger audiences, maybe people young persons who have never been to an opera before. It's about an hour and 15 minutes long, one act, several scenes. So it won't scare anybody away, and it's totally family friendly, and the idea is that we want to attract the younger audiences as well as the mature audiences, because there's a really wonderful sort of sense of young and old, and we actually have that as a theme in Mother Alberta's aria, where she says, young and old, big and small, the secret river runs through us all. And so this is something that we feel very, very close to in the way that we hope the diversity, the inclusiveness, the idea of we're all one family, really. And that's the beauty of this story.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm gonna open it up for questions, but before I do, I believe we have one more musical selection for your for your enjoyment this evening, please welcome our wonderful performers, Kiani and Emily, with the title song of The Secret River. Does anybody have the questions? You can ask questions of the performers as well, or Gabe. Anybody? Yes.
I'd like to ask the performers how they feel playing, sort of the first parts of a new piece, and also based on sort of, local storytelling.
Well, for me, it's always a huge thrill to get to do a new piece, because you're part of bringing something into the world that didn't exist before. I said, one of my favorite Sondheim quotes is, "Look, I made a hat where there never was a hat." And so being part of making the hat is very exciting. And it's also playing a real person is a thrill for me, because you can do so much research. When we were talking before, the more I found out about Marjorie, the more I appreciated the fact that she managed to find this optimism in her later life, despite some of the tragedies that she'd been through. And that absolutely pervades this book. And I think Stella has done such a beautiful job of capturing that optimism and that hopefulness. And so being a part of, any part of creation is part of being hopeful, that you're making something new and that you're going to reach people in a new way. So I think that combination of being a part of that creative process and also deliberately bringing something that is positive and hopeful and bringing people together, and with the message of, we can be better than this, and we can look to help our community and help each other. And it's very special to be a part of this.
Nailed it.
What about you?
She pretty much said everything I think it's like a wonderful opportunity to be able to create something that's completely new and that is so connected to the community. And I was actually talking to Stella and a few of you that when I first heard of the book, I was really upset that I did not grow up with this book. And when I finally got a chance to read it, I was like, how funny how the story now really matches with what's happening now. And how the story really needs to be told right now, how we actually need that sense of hope. And that what really drove it home for me, the essence of it for me, was that Calpurnia is able to take the gifts that she has and turn her hard times into soft times. And how each of us all have gifts, and we can turn our hard times into soft times. And I think that's really what needs to be said.
I have two questions. Just two questions. That's it. So when we were at the archive, I remember that you can I sit here? There just happens to be a chair here. I remember that you showed us that The Secret River was translated into German, into Italian, but in those versions, it was a white family.
Yes, right.
And I found that so fascinating. Yeah.
And interesting, the same thing with the Yearling, another something construed as a child's story, although I don't think it's a child's story.
It's pretty heavy for
It's translated into these different languages, and there's like a Pakistani boy, like there's an Indian boy on the cover, like, you know, this is like a cracker Florida boy with blonde hair, you know, straw-colored hair as he's described, and people transform these books. They make them something that their children see themselves in, and that's what's so important about the children's book trade, is that children have to find themselves in these characters, and Calpurnia was such a beautiful character. They had to do this like neutral artwork because of the times and the place, but now I think white children, you know, rich children, poor children, all can relate to that spirit of hope that she wants to make her family, you know, thrive.
That universal message reads through of youth empowerment,
yes,
which I think is what drew us to the story. Now, my second question is, who has their tickets to the Secret River? Okay, great. So I brought some posters. You can take some posters. I have even little business cards. If this is too big to fit in your wallet, you could take a business card. We'll take all of them out there. Weren't they wonderful, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you all. Thank you all so much for joining us. They're going to stick around. We have some goodies out there. Thank you for providing the snacks. I already have quite a few myself. But they're going to be out there if you want to ask them some more questions. Hope to see you at the opera. All right? Yay. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you all those people online. Bye. Bye, people online.
We have brochures about the Marjorie Kanan Rawlings collection and the Marjorie Kanan Rawlings Society that are available out there.
Because you got a lot to take home.